In 1913, Argentina was the 8th richest country on earth, wealthier than France, more prosperous than Germany, a magnet for European immigrants who genuinely believed that Buenos Aires was the next New York. They weren't wrong. The land was extraordinary. The cattle ranches were endless. The grain exports fed half the world. The architecture in the capital was modelled on Paris. This was not a developing nation. This was a nation that had already arrived. Now. Inflation rose above 200% in 2023. 40% of the population lives in poverty. 9 sovereign debt defaults, more than any country in recorded history. The peso, a currency so destroyed that ordinary Argentines keep their savings in physical US dollars hidden inside their mattresses. Here is what makes this story different from every economic collapse you've ever studied. Argentina is not a tragedy of bad luck. It is not a story of natural disasters, colonial extraction, or a lack of resources. It is something far more disturbing. Argentina is a nation that was handed every possible advantage and then, repeatedly, methodically, almost deliberately, chose to burn it down. The doctors diagnosed the disease, the patient read the prescription, and then the patient voted to throw it in the bin. That is the question this video answers. Not what destroyed Argentina's economy, but why does a country, given the cure, keep choosing the illness? And why, unless something fundamental breaks, it always will. To understand the depth of the tragedy, you first have to understand the scale of the gift. Argentina was not a country that slowly built its wealth. It was a country that sat on top of it. The Pampas, the vast fertile plains stretching across the centre of the country, are some of the most productive agricultural land on the planet. Not just in South America, on the planet. In the early 20th century, Argentina produced 1/3 of the world's corn. It was the world's largest exporter of beef. Its wheat fields supplied European tables. Its wool clothed European bodies. It had railways, ports, and a capital city that European visitors described as the most cosmopolitan place they had ever seen outside of Europe itself. The numbers confirm what the photographs suggest. By 1913, Argentina's GDP per capita was higher than that of Switzerland, Sweden, and the Netherlands. Buenos Aires had one of the world's first subway systems. It opened in 1913, before any city in the Southern Hemisphere, and before most cities in Europe. The middle class was expanding rapidly. Literacy rates were among the highest in the Americas. Foreign investment was pouring in. Argentina was not just wealthy, it was the kind of country that made other countries feel inadequate. This is not nostalgia. This is the baseline. Because the only way to truly feel the weight of what was lost is to understand what was there to lose. Everything was in place. The soil, the climate, the infrastructure, the capital, the people. Everything except what would come next. The year is 1946. The name is Juan Domingo Perón. Before Perón, Argentina was already showing cracks. But the institutions held. The economy, though unequal, was functional. The political machinery, though imperfect, had guardrails. Perón dismantled the guardrails. He did not do it through violence alone. He did something far more seductive. He offered the Argentine working class exactly what they had been waiting to hear. That the wealth of the nation belonged to them. That the oligarchs had stolen enough. That the state would now protect them, feed them, house them, and guarantee their dignity. The crowds were enormous. The adoration was real. And to be clear, some of what Perón offered was genuinely needed. The wages rose. The workers gained rights. The poor gained visibility. But underneath, the generosity was a machine. Perón nationalized industries. He expanded the state payroll. He printed money to fund benefits his government could not otherwise afford. He built a political coalition whose loyalty was structurally dependent on continued state handouts. The moment the handouts stopped, the coalition collapsed. So the handouts could never stop. This was not a policy, it was a trap. Designed, perhaps unconsciously, to be permanent. By the time Perón was overthrown in 1955, the blueprint was already embedded in the national DNA. The lesson every subsequent Argentine politician drew from his rise was identical. Spend. Promise. Win. And here is the most dangerous part of that lesson. It worked. So what do you think happened the next time an election came around? The decades that followed Perón were not just economically damaging. They were psychologically catastrophic. Military coups, civilian governments, more coups. Each administration inherited a state too large to fund and too politically explosive to shrink. So each administration did the same thing. They printed money. By the 1980s, Argentina was not experiencing inflation in the way most countries understand the word. In 1989, annual inflation hit 3,079%, not a typo. 3,079%. Prices changed not monthly, not weekly, but daily, hourly. Workers cashed their paychecks and sprinted to the supermarket before the numbers on the shelves updated. Restaurants stopped printing menus and just announced prices verbally, because by the time the menus came back from the printer, the prices were already wrong. This is the part that most economic analyses miss entirely. When a generation of people grows up in hyperinflation, something breaks in the way they think about money. Saving becomes irrational. Long-term planning becomes absurd. Trust in the currency, trust in institutions, trust in any kind of financial promise evaporates completely. The Argentine public did not become irresponsible with money. They adapted rationally to a system that punished responsibility. Why save pesos when the peso is worthless by Thursday? Why trust a bank when the government has frozen accounts before? Why vote for a politician promising austerity when the last one promising austerity made things worse? The addiction was not just political. It had been hardwired into an entire generation's nervous system. By 1991, Argentina was desperate for something it had not felt in decades. Stability. Economy. Minister Domingo Cavallo gave it to them. He introduced the convertibility plan. 1 Argentine peso would equal exactly $1, fixed, legally guaranteed, non-negotiable. The relief was immediate and intoxicating. Inflation collapsed almost overnight, from thousands of percent to single digits. Foreign investment returned. The middle class began to breathe again. Consumer credit appeared. Shopping malls opened. Argentines flew abroad for holidays. The peso felt real. For a decade, the illusion held, but it was an illusion, because the fundamental problem, the state spending more than it earned and borrowing to cover the gap, had not been solved. It had been hidden. The dollar peg did not cure the addiction, it just made the addict look healthy. The government kept spending, the debt kept growing. But because the currency felt stable, nobody asked the question that needed to be asked. What happens when the dollars run out? In December 2001, they found out. The government froze bank accounts to stop a bank run. Ordinary Argentines woke up to discover they could not access their own savings. Riots erupted. 5 presidents resigned in 10 days. The peso collapsed. Overnight, millions of middle-class Argentines lost their savings entirely. The fake cure had worn off, and the patient who had just spent a decade believing they were cured was now sicker than before. But the most devastating chapter was not the collapse itself. It was what the Argentine public did next, when someone finally tried to offer them the real medicine. The real medicine was always austerity. Spend less than you earn. Shrink the state. Stop printing money. Let prices find their natural level. Accept short-term pain in exchange for long-term structural health. Every serious economist agreed. Every IMF program demanded it. Every reform government attempted it. And every time the Argentine public rejected it with fury. In 2018, President Mauricio Macri inherited an economy already showing the familiar symptoms. He went to the IMF and secured the largest loan in the fund's history, $57 billion. He implemented spending cuts. He raised utility prices that had been artificially suppressed for years. He tried to close the gap between what the government spent and what it actually collected. The pain was immediate, the poverty rate climbed, the peso weakened, real wages fell. By 2019, Macri was voted out. The Peronists returned. This is not simply a story of a heartless reformer being punished. It is a story of rational behaviour inside a broken system. When austerity arrives, the people who suffer first are always the poorest. They feel the price rises, they lose the subsidies, they watch the numbers in their bank accounts shrink in real terms. Voting the austerity government out is not irrational. It is the logical response to being the person who bears the cost of a system you did not design. The trap is not that Argentines are foolish. The trap is that the incentives make the self-destructive choice feel like the only sensible one. Which raises the darkest question of all. Here is the mechanics of the trap laid completely bare. Imagine you are a politician running for office in Argentina. You have two choices. You can tell the truth. You can say that decades of overspending have left the country insolvent, that painful cuts are unavoidable, that subsidies must end, state jobs must go, and prices must rise before they can fall. You can tell the voter that the next 4 years will hurt before they heal. Or you can promise that electricity bills will be frozen at 2010 prices. You can promise to protect every single state job. You can promise that the peso will hold. You can promise that the foreign reserves are fine, that the debt is manageable, and that growth is coming. The honest candidate loses. Every time. This is not a moral failure. It is a structural one. The politician who tells the truth is asking the voter to absorb immediate, visible, personal pain in exchange for abstract, distant, uncertain future benefits. The politician who lies is offering the opposite, immediate, tangible relief with the cost deferred to someone else at some later point somehow. The voters are not stupid. They are responding to incentives that make the comfortable lie more rational than the uncomfortable truth. And the politicians are not uniquely corrupt. They are responding to an electoral system that rewards whoever can hold the illusion together long enough to win. The trap is elegant in its brutality. Both sides, the voter and politician, are locked inside it. Both are making an individual logical choice. Both are driving the country toward the cliff together. And in the years after Macri's defeat, Argentina drove directly toward it at full speed. Between 2019 and 2023, Argentina's central bank printed money on a scale that even the country's own inflation-scarred population found shocking. The government of Alberto Fernandez, facing a pandemic, a debt crisis, and a coalition that demanded spending, did what Argentine governments always do. It printed the gap. By 2023, annual inflation had hit 211%. The official peso exchange rate and the black market blue dollar rate had diverged so dramatically that two parallel economies effectively existed. The official economy, where the government pretended the numbers were manageable, and the real economy, where ordinary Argentines priced everything in dollars and converted pesos the moment they received them. The central bank's foreign currency reserves fell into negative territory. Argentina owed more in short-term obligations than it actually held in dollars. The government was implementing currency controls so extreme that importing basic goods became nearly impossible. Companies could not repatriate profits. Businesses could not pay foreign suppliers. The old tricks had a shelf life, and Argentina had finally reached it. For decades, the playbook had worked because there was always something left to drain. Pension funds, public utilities, foreign reserves, IMF credit lines. Each crisis found a new pool to empty, a new short-term bridge to cross. By late 2023, there were no bridges left. The foreign reserves were gone. The printing press had destroyed the currency. The population was exhausted and angry. Argentina had finally run out of road, and into that wreckage walked the most unusual political figure the country had ever produced. Javier Milei had a television show. He screamed. He described himself as the lion. He carried a chainsaw to campaign rallies as a prop for what he promised to do to the Argentine state. In November 2023, a country with 211% inflation elected him president. Milei's program was not reform. It was a demolition. He announced the elimination of half the government's ministries on day one. He cut public spending by the largest amount any government had ever attempted in a single year. He devalued the official peso by 54% immediately upon taking office. He eliminated subsidies that had been politically untouchable for 30 years. He told Argentines directly, with no softening, that the shock would be severe. The shock was severe. Monthly inflation hit 25% in December 2023 alone. Poverty rose to over 50% by mid-2024. Real wages collapsed. The economic pain was immediate and crushing. And then something happened that nobody in Argentina's economic history had ever quite managed to produce. The budget moved into surplus. For the first time in over a decade, Argentina's government was spending less than it collected. The primary fiscal surplus, Milei's central obsession, held for months in a row. By late 2024, monthly inflation had fallen from that December peak of 25% to below 3%. The chainsaw was drawing blood. But it was also drawing results that Argentina had not seen in a generation. Whether the patient could survive the surgery long enough for the cure to take hold was the question nobody could answer. Here is the final uncomfortable truth. Milei's surgery may be working. The numbers, at least the short-term numbers, are moving in the right direction. Inflation is falling. The fiscal accounts are in surplus. International reserves are slowly rebuilding. The peso, for the first time in years, has shown signs of genuine stability. But Argentina has been here before. Not here exactly, but in a moment that felt like a turning point. The convertibility plan felt like a turning point. The IMF bailout in 2018 felt like a turning point. Every decade produces a moment where it appears briefly that the cycle might actually be breaking. The danger is not that Milei's economics are wrong. The danger is that the cure requires a level of sustained public patience that Argentina's political psychology has never demonstrated. The austerity is working, but it is working slowly, and it is hurting loudly. Poverty above 50% is not an abstraction. It is a mother calculating whether she can feed her children this week. It is a small business owner watching customers disappear. It is a pensioner realizing their fixed income no longer covers rent. These people vote. And the political forces waiting to replace Milei, the Peronist machine, the unions, the subsidy infrastructure have not dissolved. It is waiting. The Argentine vicious cycle was never just an economic problem. It is a test of whether a society can collectively absorb pain in the present to avoid catastrophe in the future. Most societies have failed that test once. Argentina has failed it 9 times. The question is whether this time finally is different. History suggests you should not bet on it.